We're going in 3, 2, 1.
Yo, what is up, everyone? Tay here, and I'm finally finished with this long Fantastic Four Avengers Doomsday video that I've been working on for like the past week. So a lot to discuss in today's video because there were all sorts of scoops and leaks that started coming out after the Fantastic Four trailer dropped that I really wanted to get into, and it just took me a little bit longer than I would have liked to get to those because I had two other videos that I posted within the last few days that I had to get released first. So if you missed those videos, you should definitely check them out. They are linked in the description down below. And then because some of these leaks and scoops were things that came out in the week and 2 weeks after the Fantastic Four trailer dropped, some of you may have heard these in other videos covering this or whatever. So I might be a little bit late to the party on it, but you know, I gotta talk about what I'm excited about and things that are interesting to me, otherwise what's the point? So yeah, I hope you guys watch the whole thing because I am gonna, spin my own take on all of this, get into some theory talk, and get into several different leaks and scoops and reports. So yeah, we're gonna get into all of that, but first, just real quick, I know I have just a handful of super thanks from the last video, and I think I'm just gonna keep a hold on those and save them for the next video, just to kind of let them accumulate a little bit so we can really dig into the questions in the next one. So I hope you guys that left those are cool with that. And to those of you watching, remember that if you would like to leave a super thanks with a question or a comment on this video, that those are always very appreciated and that I will read and respond to those in the next video.
And I am right here. Whatever life throws at us, we'll face it together.
All right, so let's start off talking a little bit about the recent Fantastic Four trailer and how some of what will happen in the Fantastic Four movie will tie into what we've been talking about in the last few videos in regards to Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars. Because with Doctor Doom and the Fantastic Four both being characters that aren't being introduced until Phase 6, a lot of people have been wondering how exactly Marvel Studios are going to create some kind of deeper connection and rivalry between the two, since Doctor Doom and the Fantastic Four are intrinsically linked in the comics. And I think how Marvel Studios and the Russo brothers might try and do that is actually through Franklin Richards. Because even though it hasn't been officially confirmed yet, at this point, it's basically Marvel Studios' worst-kept secret that Franklin Richards is going to be at the center of the plot of the Fantastic Four movie, and that this is likely the main reason why the movie's subtitle is First Steps. And, I mean, we've seen shots of Sue Storm looking pregnant in the trailer, and we've also seen leaked set video of her walking around holding a baby, and then we've seen this scene where she's on the space shuttle, and it looks like she could be in some kind of labor pains. So based on all this information and what we've seen in the trailer, it looks like what's probably going to happen in the movie is that Sue will be pregnant when the team goes on their first launch into space, and that when they are exposed to whatever energy gives them their powers in the MCU, that Franklin will also be exposed in the womb, and that'll probably be part of the backstory for why he is born a mutant and why he will have such potent abilities at a very young age. But that said, it's also important to note that based on the casting reports we've seen for the Fantastic Four, that Franklin will probably be around 4 years old during the main timeline in the movie, which would suggest that the present day events in the film will occur around 4 to 5 years after the team's first launch into space when they got their powers and became superheroes. And according to several different leaks that have dropped since the Fantastic Four trailer came out, in the Fantastic Four movie, Franklin will reportedly have multiversal and reality warping abilities and that he will actually be what draws Galactus to Earth in the first place, because Galactus wants to use Franklin's powers to recreate his old universe. And if this is accurate, then this is big news, because it means that Marvel Studios are being very true to the comics in how they are adapting both Galactus and Franklin. Because in the comics, Franklin is like super powerful. He is a beyond Omega level mutant and is one of the most powerful characters in the entire Marvel universe, even at times rivaling that of the Celestials. And one of the things that makes Franklin so extraordinary in the comics is that he is actually capable of constructing new universes. In fact, for those of you who have read Hickman's Secret Wars comic, you'll know that at the end of the Secret Wars story, after Doom has been defeated, it's actually Reed, Franklin, and Molecule Man who combined the powers of the Beyonders with Franklin and Molecule Man's reality powers in order to recreate the entire multiverse one universe at a time. So if Franklin is going to have the same kind of reality warping powers in the MCU that he had in the comics, to where he can actually form entire universes, then it makes sense that he would probably play a key role in how the events of Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars could play out, and that he could even be a key part of Doctor Doom's plan. Because, Doctor Doom is like one of the greatest villains in all of fiction. And one of the things that makes Doom one of the most formidable villains in all of fiction is not that he's more powerful than other villains, it's his intellect and his ability to make a plan that accounts for all of the variables and is always 10 moves ahead of anyone who would oppose him. So in the MCU, when it comes to these supreme beings like the Scarlet Witch and Franklin Richards, who have these multiversal powers and are way more powerful than Doctor Doom is, it seems likely that Doctor Doom will factor in all of those variables as a way to use those characters and their powers to benefit him as a part of his plan so that they can't be used against him. And I'm not going to dig into it too much because I've already talked about these recent scoops before. But a few months ago, there were a bunch of different scoops regarding Wanda Maximoff and her role in the upcoming Avengers movies that said that in Avengers Doomsday, Wanda and Doctor Doom will actually be romantically involved, and that Doctor Doom could be using Wanda as a way to use her power as the Scarlet Witch to help him take over the multiverse. And when I saw these new leaks dropping about Franklin Richards and his powers in the MCU, it made me wonder if Doctor Doom could also have a similar plan to use Franklin Richards in a similar way. Because in the Secret Wars comic, after Doctor Doom became a god and recreated reality into Battle World, something that he changed to be a part of this new reality is he basically stole Reed Richards' entire family. Because even though Doctor Doom's greatest strength is his intellect, one of his greatest weaknesses is his ego and his pettiness. And because of how petty he is, he was always very jealous of Reed Richards. So in the Secret Wars comic, when he creates Battle World, he makes Sue Storm his new wife, and Franklin and Valeria become his new children. And to them, they had no memory of what their lives were like before Battle World, and they truly believed that Doctor Doom was their true father. Now, I'm not saying that Marvel Studios are going to adapt that into the upcoming Avengers movies, because considering that Marvel Studios haven't had time to properly set up that relationship between Doctor Doom and Reed Richards and the rest of the Fantastic Four in the MCU, I just don't think there's enough time and backstory to set that up in a way that would make sense. Plus, Sue Storm becoming Doom's wife in Doomsday and Secret Wars would go against the other leaks we've heard about Wanda being the one who's romantically involved with Doom. However, that said, I could actually see certain elements of Franklin Richards' story from Hickman's Secret Wars comic being adapted into the MCU in the upcoming Avengers movies, and that maybe even Franklin could take on some of the story points that Molecule Man had in the comics. Which, look, I know I've discussed different takes on this kind of Molecule Man theory before, but I am going to dig into it a little bit again. Because at the beginning of the Secret Wars comic, when Doctor Doom defeated the Beyonders so that he could create Battle World, as a human, he wasn't strong enough to hold all of that Beyonder power inside of him because all of the omnipotent energy would have basically torn him apart. So what he did is he basically funneled all of that Beyonder energy into Molecule Man like a omnipotent battery source, and then kept Molecule Man stored away in a pocket dimension underneath Castle Doom on Battle World. That way he could draw that godlike Beyonder's power into himself whenever he needed it without it overloading and destroying him. And since it seems very unlikely that Marvel Studios will introduce Molecule Man into the MCU for Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars, something I've always said is that since Molecule Man is such an important character to the Secret Wars story in the comic, that it would make sense that the Russo brothers would adapt parts of his story into one or two characters for the movies. Now, the last time I talked about this theory, I said that it sounded like Wanda could take on a similar role to the one that Molecule Man had in the comics, because as the Scarlet Witch, Wanda also has powers to manipulate reality. And I'm not going back on that theory as much as I'm really just saying that it's probably going to be more complex than that, and that we could see more than one character who kind of gets parts of that Molecule Man story for the upcoming Avengers films, when he did have a pretty integral role to the Secret Wars story in the comics. So I do think that Wanda could kind of have elements from the Molecule Man story, but that she could also kind of have elements of the Beyonders story, where Doctor Doom could use her powers similar to the way he used the power of the Beyonders, and that she could also take on certain elements of Sue Storm's story from the Secret Wars comic as Doctor Doom's significant other. In fact, one of the other scoops that just dropped recently said that Wanda will be one of the few characters that will have a large role in both Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars. And that's noteworthy because if we look at Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, besides Thanos, the only characters that had large roles in both movies were Tony, Steve, Bruce, Thor, and Natasha. And with the cast of Doomsday and Secret Wars being even bigger than those movies, it will likely be the same thing, to where besides Doctor Doom, there will probably only be a handful of characters that will have leading roles in both films, and according to these new scoops, Wanda will be one of them. So yeah, I still think that Wanda could take on certain elements of the Molecule Man story from the comics. I'm just saying that maybe Franklin Richards could take on some of those story elements as well. And as I've discussed before, I think that Doctor Doom's overall plan in Avengers Doomsday will probably be very similar to what it was in the Time Runs Out and Secret Wars comics, to where he will likely be trying to save the multiverse from the incursions and the Multiversal War, and the way he will likely go about doing that is his plan will be to usurp Loki on his throne at the end of time so that he can become the new god of the multiverse. And once he is in that position, he will destroy the multiverse and use pieces and elements from all of those different universes and realities to create a new singular timeline, a new singular universe that he can rule over as its god, very similar to what he did in the Secret Wars comic. And while Wanda and her powers as the Scarlet Witch could definitely help Doom usurp Loki and take over the multiverse, her powers might not be enough to reshape the broken pieces of those universes into an entirely new universe. However, with the power of Franklin Richards, Doctor Doom could possibly do that. Or maybe he'll need both. Maybe he'll need both the power of Wanda and Franklin, kind of how he needed the power of both the Beyonders and Molecule Man in the comics. You know, maybe Franklin could be the one who provides the power to make this new universe, but Wanda and the power of the Scarlet Witch will be needed as the one to shape it. And if something like this happens, you know, if some version of this theory I'm constructing is accurate, then maybe Doctor Doom could actually use Franklin as a kind of battery source for omnipotent power, similar to what he did with Molecule Man in the comics. Now, as far as how Doom would achieve this, I'm not exactly sure. Maybe he could use his magical abilities to influence Franklin's young mind and convince him to forget who his true family is so that he thinks that he is his true father, or, something like that, some kind of magical manipulation. Because remember, Doctor Doom is a sorcerer just like Doctor Strange is. And one thing to remember about all of this is that while Franklin is said to be around 4 years old in the Fantastic Four movie, that Marvel Studios are reportedly recasting the character for Avengers Doomsday with an actor who will be between the ages of 10 to 13. So this likely means that from the perspective of the Fantastic Four team, that there will probably be somewhere around a 5 to 8 year time jump between the end of Fantastic Four First Steps to the beginning of Avengers Doomsday. So yeah, even though Franklin will be preschool aged in the Fantastic Four movie, it sounds like he will be more of an adolescent by the time we get to Avengers Doomsday. And, in order for Doctor Doom to do all of this, at some point he would have to basically take control of Franklin, get him away from his family. And while that is definitely pretty dark, it could actually be a good story move that could make the Fantastic Four much more involved in the overall plot of the upcoming Avengers films than we might have previously thought, especially considering that they are brand new characters to the MCU. Because even though there are a lot of leading characters in Hickman's Secret Wars comic, the two characters that are really at the center of the story more than anyone else are Doctor Doom and Reed Richards. Because in the story, their rivalry and Doctor Doom's jealousness over Reed is really a driving factor for the whole plot. And when the final incursion occurs at the beginning of the Secret Wars story, Reed is actually the only member of the Fantastic Four family who ends up surviving, while the rest of the team ends up being destroyed in the final incursion. And of course, this leaves Reed crushed, thinking that his family is gone, only for him to wake up in Battleworld 8 years later to realize that Doctor Doom has brought them all back to life and made them forget Reed and think that they're his family. So this makes the story very personal for Reed, as he's not just fighting to save the multiverse, but he's also fighting to get his family back. And towards the end of the Secret Wars comic, Reed ends up discovering the pocket dimension where Owen Reese, the Molecule Man, is being kept, and this is when he realizes that Owen is actually the one who is holding all of the Beyonders' power and not Doctor Doom. And then we see Doctor Doom show up, and Reed and Doom get into this big fight, and during the fight, Doom admits to Reed that if he had been the one that was given this power, that he would have done a better job at saving the multiverse than he did. And when Owen hears this, he decides that Doom isn't worthy of the Beyonders' power and gives it to Reed instead, and this is basically how Doctor Doom ends up being defeated. Now, like I said, I don't think that all of that will end up being adapted into the plot of the upcoming Avengers movies directly, but if Franklin Richards were to become a part of Doctor Doom's plan, where he uses him like a omniversal battery source, similar to what he did with Molecule Man in the comics, then this could be a way to make the Fantastic Four much more prominent characters in the upcoming Avengers films, because it would make what Doctor Doom is doing much more personal for the Fantastic Four, especially Reed and Sue, and it could also create some interpersonal conflict between Reed and Doctor Doom that Marvel Studios haven't had the time to set up otherwise, because Reed and Sue wouldn't just be random characters that are trying to help the Avengers to stop Doctor Doom. They would actually be trying to stop Doctor Doom so that they can get their son back. And, of course, this is just a theory, but according to those recent reports I mentioned, Franklin will play an important role in the upcoming Avengers films, and I think this is one possible way that that could happen. Which I do think something like that would make sense, because then his role could serve more as a way to up the stakes for the Fantastic Four, and it would also make Franklin basically kind of like a MacGuffin for Doctor Doom and his powers. But anyways, let's move along now, because I do still have one more recent scoop that I want to touch on that is actually a pretty big deal for what could happen in Avengers Doomsday. So let's get to that.
I did every version of me.
My variants throughout the multiverse.
Universes colliding. Endless incursions.
All right, so one of the other big scoops we got recently came from Jeff Snyder and a few other sources saying that Marvel Studios are currently looking at different actors to recast Kang for what would likely be just a short scene in Avengers Doomsday. And look, before any of you guys say anything, I know a lot of people kind of laugh off anything that comes from Snyder, which I do understand. But when it comes to casting news, that's definitely the area of scoops where he is the most reliable and has the best track record. And let's also not forget that he was actually the one who dropped the news about Robert Downey Jr. returning as Doctor Doom several weeks before it was officially announced by Marvel at Comic-Con. So when it comes to these reports about Kang, especially since it's also coming from some other scoopers as well, I do think it's worth listening to. Because a few weeks ago, there were some other reports coming out saying that Marvel Studios were having discussions about bringing back Kang in some capacity, and that they were even considering bringing back Jonathan Majors. Now, I think if they were to bring back Kang, that they should just bring back Majors because he was so good in that role, and also because Majors has already said in interviews that he would be happy to return if Marvel Studios offered. But unfortunately, I think that Majors coming back is pretty unlikely, at least at this point, because I think that Disney is just too risk-averse to sign off on that, even if it's what Kevin Feige wanted to do. But that aside, I do actually think there is probably at least some truth to these rumors about Marvel Studios at least considering recasting Kang. Because, as I'm sure you guys remember, a few months ago, there were rumors swirling about that Coleman Domingo could possibly be taking over the role as Kang. And a few weeks ago, Coleman Domingo actually talked about this in a recent interview where he confirmed that he and his representatives did have a meeting with Marvel Studios about him coming over into the MCU, and that the Kang recast was something that they discussed in those meetings, but that ultimately Coleman said that he wanted a fresh role and didn't want to take someone else's place. Now, this does not confirm that Marvel Studios offered the role of Kang to Coleman because the context of what he said is a little unclear on that, only that it was something that they discussed in the meeting. However, what came out in these newer casting reports is that one of the actors that Marvel Studios is supposedly looking at for the Kang recast is Tremel Tillman from Severance, and that it would probably just be for one or two scenes in Avengers Doomsday to kind of explain why the Kang story and the Kang characters are no longer a factor in the coming Multiversal War. And reportedly, the way that Marvel Studios are potentially looking to do that is to have a scene of some kind that shows Doctor Doom as the one who actually kills Kang off. And I think that's a great idea, but I could be a bit biased here because this is exactly what I said Marvel Studios should do in a video I released a couple of months ago. Because think about it, with Marvel Studios swapping out the Kangs and the Council of Kang with Doctor Doom as the new overarching villain of the Multiverse saga, I think the best way to do that would be to have Doctor Doom as the one who destroys all of the different Kang variants, because that would cement him as the truly bigger multiversal threat and the true overarching villain of the saga. Now, if we do see something like this, then I don't think that Tillman would be recast as Kang the Conqueror. I think he would likely be recast to play the Council of Kangs, because the Kang the Conqueror story has already been wrapped up in a way that's fairly explainable with the ending of Ant-Man Quantumania when he was sucked into the multiversal core. But where the Kang story still has a very big loose plot thread that still needs to be wrapped up is with the Council of Kangs because of that big post-credit scene we saw at the end of Ant-Man Quantumania. Because that was a big scene that definitely, in my opinion, needs to be resolved somehow in order for the events of Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars to go forward. Because as far as the audience knows, all of those Kang variants are still out there wreaking havoc in the multiverse. So I think it would just be a bit of lazy storytelling if those loose plot threads weren't somehow wrapped up or explained by the time we get to Avengers Doomsday. And if Marvel Studios do recast someone to take on the role of the Council of Kangs, then I think the perfect way to bring those characters into Avengers Doomsday would be to have them appear in the opening scene where we could see Doctor Doom defeating the Council of Kangs, because I think that would totally fall in line with the plot of the overall movie and what Doctor Doom's overall goals are. Because based on what happened in the Secret Wars comic, Hickman's Secret Wars comic, Doom's goal in Avengers Doomsday is probably going to be that he is trying to stop the incursions and save the multiverse. And if we go back into the earlier events of Ant-Man Quantumania, there's a scene where we see Kang the Conqueror talking to Janet, where he confirmed that if he didn't get out of the quantum realm, that the Council of Kangs would cause endless incursions and eventually it would lead to another multiversal war. So the same way that Doctor Doom had to defeat the Beyonders in order to become a god and savior of the multiverse in the Secret Wars comics, I think it could kind of be the same thing in the MCU, but instead of the Beyonders being the ones who are causing the incursions and need to be stopped, it could instead be the Council of Kangs. Plus, I mean, honestly, I just think seeing Doctor Doom taking on Immortus, Ramatut, and the Scarlet Centurion in the opening scene of the movie would just be a really cool way to set the tone for just how formidable Doctor Doom truly is. You know, that it could be a way to show just how ruthless Doctor Doom is, kind of similar to the opening scene we saw in Avengers Infinity War, where Thanos destroyed Thor's ship and took out Loki. And if Doom does take out the Council of Kangs, then maybe it could be something that he does by himself, but I think it's more likely that we would probably see him working with other characters, like maybe his army of Black Swans that he had in the comics, or maybe it could even be Doctor Strange and Clea. Because something I've speculated on in past videos is how in Avengers Doomsday, I think it's possible that we could actually see Clea and Doctor Strange initially working with Doctor Doom instead of against him. Because as I've mentioned before, in the Time Runs Out and Secret Wars comic, Doctor Strange actually teamed up with Doctor Doom to stop the Beyonders and then actually became Doom's advisor for the Secret Wars story. Now, eventually, Doctor Strange did turn against Doom, which I would definitely expect to happen in the movies as well. But if we do see a scene in Avengers Doomsday where Doctor Doom is taking out the Council of Kangs, I do think that that would be a way that would make sense for why Doctor Strange would be working with him. And of course, this all just depends on what the Russo brothers have planned for Doctor Strange's bigger story arc in the upcoming Avengers films. But as far as we know, Doctor Strange has been out traveling the multiverse with Clea the past few years since the end of Multiverse of Madness to help her stop the incursions, just like he did in the Time Runs Out comic. So with how Multiverse of Madness ended with Doctor Strange going out into the multiverse, I do think it's easy to foresee how Strange's mission into the multiverse to stop the incursions could have eventually led him to encountering Doctor Doom just like it did in the comics, especially when you add that on top of the other rumors we've heard about Clea potentially being a member of the Black Swans. So yeah, maybe what Doctor Strange has been doing the past several years since he's been gone from the MCU 616 universe is he's actually been out there traveling the multiverse with Clea and Doctor Doom, hunting down and defeating Kang variants, and that this could eventually lead them to the core Council of Kang members with Immortus, Scarlet Centurion, and Ramatut, and that could be one of the first scenes we see in Avengers Doomsday. And of course, this is just fun speculating at this point, but either way, I do think it does make sense for Doctor Doom to be the one who takes out the Council of Kangs as a way to explain why they are no longer a factor in everything that's happening in the Multiversal War in these upcoming Avengers films. Which, I mean, if we want to get technical about it, Marvel Studios did promise that Kang, or at least a version of Kang, would return with that final tag at the end of the Quantumania end credits where it says Kang will return. So Marvel Studios may have kind of backed themselves into a corner with that one. And in those past videos, when I said that I didn't think that Marvel Studios were completely finished with the Kang storyline just because they were introducing Doctor Doom, it's not like I had any inside information or anything. It was just something that I always thought made sense because I felt like it was necessary for Marvel Studios to somehow wrap up the Council of Kangs story after that big post-credit scene in Ant-Man Quantumania, and also because I always thought that showing Doom as the one who eradicates the Council of Kangs was the perfect way to set up his character. Because for one, it would obviously reveal Doctor Doom as the larger multiversal threat to the audience, but also because it could set up Doctor Doom to be perceived as a big hero to some of the other heroic characters we'll see in the movie. Because something we've heard in past scoops and rumors is that in Phase 6, that certain characters like Peter Parker, or also, of course, like Doctor Strange, may actually end up being convinced that Doctor Doom is actually the good guy and that his plan to stop the incursions may truly be the only way to save the multiverse, even if that means destroying most of the multiverse to do so. So yeah, to recap everything that I've been going through in this video and how the Russo brothers could possibly adapt certain elements from the Secret Wars comics, is that we could see the Council of Kangs sort of taking on a similar role to that of the Beyonders, where the Council of Kangs could be the ones who are revealed to be causing the incursions and wreaking havoc throughout the multiverse, and that in order for Doctor Doom to become the god of the multiverse, he must first defeat the Council of Kangs, similar to how he defeated the Beyonders in the comics. And then, as another element of that plan, Doom could also perhaps be using the powers of the Scarlet Witch to become the ruler of the multiverse, thus fulfilling the prophecy that Wong talked about back in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, where he said that the Scarlet Witch is destined to rule the cosmos.
Scarlet Witch is a being of unfathomable magic and is prophesied to either rule or annihilate the cosmos.
She could enslave the entire multiverse.
And then lastly, that Doctor Doom could also perhaps use the reality warping powers of Franklin Richards to help him create a new universe, similar to how he created Battleworld in the comics. So yeah, in a nutshell, basically, the Council of Kangs could kind of take the place of the Beyonders, and then Wanda could kind of take on a similar role to the one that Sue Storm had in the Secret Wars comics as Doctor Doom's significant other, but then at the same time, Wanda's powers as the Scarlet Witch could also represent something similar to the power of the Beyonders in the comics, as it could be the power that Doctor Doom will need to help him take over the multiverse and become a god. And then lastly, we could see Franklin Richards sort of represent a similar role to that of Owen Reese, the Molecule Man, as the character that has these amazing reality warping abilities and the power to create universes that make him an essential part of the story, even if you don't see him very often throughout the actual story itself. So yeah, that's my big, overly detailed tirade. You guys let me know what you think about all of this in the comments down below, and which elements from the comics that you think we could see adapted into the upcoming Avengers films, and how you think everything could play out in Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars. But anyways, I think we can wrap it up here for this one at this point, because I've been going on for a while. There is still actually a bunch of stuff regarding the Fantastic Four that I want to talk about that I wasn't able to get to in this video. So I'm sure I'll be back soon with another one to get into some of that, specifically regarding just stuff with the Fantastic Four. But today I wanted to talk about how the Fantastic Four movie could tie in a little bit more with the upcoming Avengers films. So yeah, I hope you guys dug this one. Please leave a like, or even better, share the video if you did. And as always, remember that if you would like to leave a super thanks with a question or a comment on this video, that those really help out the channel a lot, and that I will read and respond to those in the next video, along with the last few from the previous video. So yeah, leave a super thanks if you would like. Come follow the channel on Twitter, and also check out the last two videos I posted within the last few days if you missed them. All right, cool. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I will be back soon.